So I had in mind that I was going to launch into a kind of a new subject. I think I've touched on it a bit, and see how I do. So I'm going to do that anyway, I think. And we'll have a smaller group and we can really chat about it. And it's something that affects all of us. And it's a thing I'm a little bit nervous of. Hence my reticence to really engage with it previously. And that's, this unividualism to me, it's not just a philosophy. It's not just about a spiritual practice. It is also importantly about how we live our lives individually and what it means for us collectively. And with this body of work that I've called the pod book that I'm working on, one of the things I really want to be able to touch on is what this means for us collectively. So I have been sort of nervous of getting too involved in it because, they always say the two things you shouldn't talk about is religion and politics. And I speak an awful lot about religion. So I'm just asking for trouble, really, if I go wading into politics, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to stick my neck out and have a go. And be kind to me because these are ideas which are not clarified as they will be eventually before I tell them to the great mass of the public. But I can share them with you as we are friends. So a fundamental idea that's motivating the whole thing is that not only are we able to experience this shift,
good idea,
which has been called awakening, but that we can, hang on, here we go, a few more people coming in. There's John. Hi, John. Is that it is the leading edge of this evolutionary process. So I find myself asking, if that does turn out to be correct, as I have come to think it is, what does that mean for us as a society? And one of the reasons I think having understanding everything with what I call temporal depth, with an understanding of history of the past, is so important, because what we're in is a process. And it's very easy for us not to pay that attention. But when you see that what we're in is a process, you can see how far we come. Stephen was joking earlier about, we should have a day to honor hydrogen. And I said, yes, all our ancestors, because it is our ancestors. That's the bizarre thing we need to get our head around. This is the journey we've been on. And if you see how incredible that big journey is, it changes your perspective. And if you see how incredible our historical journey is, then to speculate about another radical shift ceases to be that implausible, I think. And if you've experienced the shift yourself, then it becomes much more plausible again. Hence all the work I do with the retreat, so you can actually feel it, you can get it. So I want to say a few words about how we might think about our collective journey, and there's an awful lot that I want to explore. So I'm going to try and discipline myself and just say a few things tonight. And as always, to begin with, to say a few things takes me much longer than it will eventually when I get more articulate. If you look at our history, what strikes me is, well, if you take any individual system, a biological system, even a physical system in the evolutionary process, it needs to do two things. It needs to have internal consistency, or it needs to hold itself together, coherence, and it needs to find a way of sustaining itself within the informational ecology it exists within. And that's true of, if you think of biological organisms, that's obviously true. They need to hold together, and when they cease to hold together, they die. And if they can't find a space within the ecology, they die. And what I see with human beings is that we are social animals, we're group animals, and that our history shows us wrestling with that process of internal coherence and externally being able to sustain ourselves in the environment. So what's real, I mean, really is quite fascinating, isn't it? That human beings arose from Africa and then split into groups so discrete that they developed completely different languages. It's an extraordinary thought, isn't it? And cultures with those languages, whole ideational networks in which they were in a bubble. All culture, you know, we talk a lot about bubbles these days, don't we? Because of the internet, you're in a little bubble. Well, all cultures are bubbles. That's what they are. In which something, and if you think a culture so deep that it's developed its own language, which is what we have. And what you see arising, I think, is a world in which those within your group are us, they are the people, and you get various forms of ethics and government to try and hold that together as a coherent functioning group in all sorts of different ways as we've evolved. And then there's the relationship with the other. And the relationship with the other is not just the natural world, it's also all the other human groups. And even a cursory look at our history shows that whilst there's some degree, obviously, of symbiotic relationships, trade, one of the things which marks out our relationships with the other is predation. And the word predator comes from the Latin for booty. It's, you know, the easiest way for a culture to do well is to go and take it from its neighbors, take stuff from its neighbors. And the most successful cultures throughout history have been the ones that were best at doing that, holding together internally and predating the other. And you see this evolution of what I think of as kindness, we are of one kind, and unkindness. And the unkindness for us in the modern age, because we've come a long way, is hard to really see because it is brutal. It is, the other are not the people. They're not us. And you can literally do anything to them. And we have. So the most of history has involved raiding parties of one group, going into the neighbors, killing the men, raping the women, killing the babies, enslaving anyone they needed to enslave. And this is not like now and then, this is the way in which we have related. And I think what that's done for us, you know, nature in the evolutionary process makes it favors, through the natural process of the ones that have this the most succeed, it favors, it makes what's good for us pleasurable, and it makes what's bad for us painful. You know, you put your hand in a fire, obviously it hurts. Why? Because it's not good for you to put your hand in the fire. And if we enjoyed it, all the people that found it enjoyable would die out, and that would be the end of that. But the people who just went, those would survive. And the pleasure, you know, if your eating's enjoyable, sex is enjoyable, things which are good for you is enjoyable. And I think socially, one of the things we need to understand if we're going to go forward is that we have enjoyed kindness within the group, things which keep the group coherent in various ways. Not just kindness, honor, and all those things, law, but kindness, that we are one kind. We like that. We like to feel like we enjoy being of one kind. We like being in crowds of people who are doing the same thing. They're like us. We support the same team, all that stuff. And on the other side, and I think it's hard for us to really get this in the modern world, is that we have also really enjoyed unkindness, because those groups that really enjoyed it have done the best. And I think that's why when you look back in history and you see this urge towards combat and towards raiding and towards conflict. We're exploring some of it through fiction these days. You see that enjoyment of inflicting of unkindness on the other. And I think it's very important for us to get that. And I think when you look at often the way people look at human beings, it's one or the other. It's like, oh, human beings are awful. Look what we've done. We're just terrible. Look at we gas the Jews and this terrible thing, and the Armenians and right the way back through history, the Romans. I mean, Jesus, what the Romans did, and back and back and back and back and back everywhere. The Native Americans, they were awful too. It's like, oh, Jesus, everywhere. It's like it. I mean, the South Americans, they were even worse. And that's one side of it. And then on the other side, this incredible kindness and this developing ethos of treating each other as you would be treated, but that's all within the group. So I think that's one of the things you see with temporal depth. And then you go, so what's happened as we've evolved, which has got us to here? And I think there's been this expansion of who is us, which has taken us from these little groups in conflict with each other, which you see, the farther back you go, the smaller the groups are, and usually through conquest, bigger groups, empires, now that's held together. Religion is playing a big role in this because it becomes something which can unite people into bigger groups. Now this is us. Now you don't do anything bad within the group, and if you do, you will be punished. You can do what you like outside the group. In fact, we'll all get together and do that. We'll go and have a crusade, or we'll go and take from them, but within the group, we don't do that anymore. And you've got this expansion of the circle of kindness, but outside of it is still unkindness. So that you're seeing two things going on at once, which is pertinent to the unividual vision, which you're seeing the evolution of us into a bigger and bigger us, but you're also seeing the evolution of the individual. So that you go, the further back you go, the more similar human beings are. Just the mere fact that every human being in a hunter-gatherer tribe does basically one of two jobs. But by the time you've got civilizations and agriculture, you've now got a whole plethora of individuals working together, still usually around family groups. You haven't individuated from the family like we have today, a lot more. But you're seeing the birth of the individual. It's very slow and developmental, but as it comes through, as the groups get bigger, the individual is becoming more and more individual until you get this big jump around the Enlightenment, where you get free thinking and the revolution that's going to cause science and the arts and the seeds planted by Socrates are going to come into fruition, and we're starting to become individuals, and you get the idea of the self, and you get the movement into the psyche, where what matters really is the psyche. And at the same time, the groups are getting, the us is expanding, until you've got to the point where they get so big that actually where we are now, I think largely, is that the us, who the group is, begins to become stated within the culture, rather than the culture versus another culture. And the biggest, the most influential moment in that, I think, is Karl Marx, where you get this idea that it's no longer the nation versus the nation. The vision becomes internationalist. This is a movement towards the universal. No, we're all one humanity. Great. But the division is between the classes of people, and that spreads across the nations. Now the division is between these people who've got this, the haves and the have-nots, and it's within the culture, and they are the other. And that's going to give birth to the other movements, which are about the same thing. Later on, you're going to get the same idea that it's not the conflict between nations. It's not even the conflict between classes. It's the conflict between the sexes. That's the one that's been throughout history. Or you're going to get it's between races. That's only going to arrive once you've got a multiracial society. Until then, the other race is the other. They're another nation. But within the society now, so now it's a conflict between races. All those divisions within the society. Now, where does that stand with the unividual vision? Well, what happens when you break out from that identity certainly with your group, with your your race type, your sex type, your any of those types, where you individuate to the point where you go, well, I'm just an individual here. And at the same time, recognize that you're the whole universe. So that the circle of kindness just completely opens up. Now, it strikes me that that's what's been happening, because the level of kindness in the modern world is astonishing historically. And I talked about this obviously at length, but, look at the Ukraine war, just again, the same thing. Why? At no other time in history would people in my country give a damn about what was happening in Ukraine, but they do. And not just here, but all over the world. The sense of being one humanity has exploded on us, partly through the technology, all the rest of it, but it has. So what happens if that continues? What happens if more and more of us go beyond even the one sense of being one humanity and just get that deep sense of soul communion, which is what the unividual is, that deep sense of being in communion with each other as souls? What's that going to do? And I think it will be an extraordinary transformation, because it's the fulfillment of that expansion of kindness. And the challenge is that tendency to see the other as the enemy, as someone who, well, it depends on the context. I don't want to say things which are wrong in different contexts, but let's just call it which is the other. So that what I see in our politics, in our way of arranging society, is an awful lot right now of those conflicts. And it came up at the end of the last meeting, this idea that we're very polarized. Well, we've always been very polarized, actually, but we're seeing it now. We're seeing these conflicts. And what really strikes me about it is that those same tendencies between the kindness and the unkindness have worked themselves out. Firstly, let me just say, in part of the process, we've overcome this. I think we've done an amazing job at sublimating that unkindness, so that, we're not treating each other like this anymore. We've got the United Nations. We've got rules of war. We even treat people better. There's a whole load of ways we've done it. But also we've got Hollywood. Now, I don't know about you, but I enjoy a movie when the baddie gets his comeuppance. I enjoy it. I enjoy seeing him get his comeuppance. There it is. That's it. But it's now in the safe confines. I think we're doing this with all sorts of things. Let's just stick with the movies, but we supplement. Sport does it. Even pornography, I think, is a way of doing it. We're finding ways to take the things which have been in us historically and sublimate it and turn it into something which is no longer harming us. It's been a massive part of our evolution. So what happens if we take that forward? Well, one of the things then I think becomes looking at the internal divisions which we're facing. Now, I don't know how many of you know this about me. I hardly ever talk about it. And one day, when it's appropriate or anyone wants me to, I'll talk about my evolution of my own political thought, just my personal journey, because it's been very important to me from a very, in fact, I was more involved in politics even before I had my awakening at 12. I was horribly precocious. And I can tell that story later. But I had a period for about 2 years where I was absolutely embedded in Marxism. In fact, I went to university originally to study Marx. I then moved to philosophy and studied him in philosophy, but moved on to other things. And that sounds strange for someone who spent their life around spiritual awakening, but there was all sorts of, the basic rationale was I convinced myself that the way to bring about a place where everyone could become enlightened was to create a communist society, because then everyone would just wake up. I was young. But what was interesting to me was that I've had a real insight through that into this us and them within society. And what strikes me is that this thing that people say often is true, that there's a tendency, because of this kindness, unkindness thing, to see the other as stupid or evil. If you don't agree with me, there's only two options. You're either stupid because you don't understand what I understand, or you're bad. And what the things that set up internal conflicts around, say, class do is they embed that. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not some profound insight there, because there is actually. But what they do is that they turn it into a world in which this us and them is increased. And that's what I think we've been seeing in Western culture recently. It's been this thing which has always been there is really highlighted. So you've got one side looking at the other side going, you're stupid or you're evil. And then the other side is going, no, you're stupid or you're evil. And what's been happening for me is that I can see it in myself so clearly now, that because of my own background, I have spent most of my life quietly, without really, not in those gross terms, but nevertheless, to some degree, looking at people who have the opposite view and going, I think they're bad people. So I historically have been on a progressive. I want to make the world a better place. You know, I mean, I joke often, you know, I came of age in the 70s. I looked around. I was born into the most affluent culture that had ever lived, with the greatest peace that had ever existed on the planet, with all the liberties to live a creative life. And I took one look at my culture and thought, this is rubbish. Let's take it, destroy it completely and start again. You know, and I think that was true of most of my friends as well. Now, of course, that was because we could see how better it could be. But because there was no temporal depth, I didn't realize how much had been achieved, which I obviously do now. So the point I'm trying to make here, I'm kind of doing it in a bit of a clumsy way, but what I'm trying to get to is that I think the possibility that I'm exploring is that the unividual vision is about creating a different way of thinking about politics. So I'm going to give you an example from a different area just to see if it helps. When I wrote the book with Peter Gandy, The Laughing Jesus, we talked about religion and we went, look, the world's broken up into these different religions, but these guys, the mystics in all these religions, have got more in common with each other than they have with the fundamentalists in those religions. So we've got to stop thinking about religions. We've got to start thinking about states of consciousness, people who've got the universal and people who haven't. And it feels the same with the politics. It feels like what we need to give birth to is a way of going, it's not about what program you think is going to work, because who knows, we need to discuss that. It's about, do you experience the universal benevolence actually? Are you representing this group or whatever that group is? Is it like, no, I'm for this group? Or are you genuinely going, no, I want something which is benevolent to everyone? Now, I may be a voice for this group because that's my individual responsibility. Don't forget that the ethic, I think, is universal benevolence, but individual responsibility. So where you apply that benevolence is where you are. So if your group is this characteristics, then yeah, you'll apply it there. But you'll apply the universal benevolence there, not I'm fighting for this group against that group because they're bad or stupid. So what I am playing with as a possible outcome of the movement into unividuality is that we will start to gather around people who have that goodwill, genuinely, but may disagree about all sorts about how you apply it. And that strikes me as the perfect way to actually make decisions. And the perfect way to actually fulfill the idea of democracy, actually, which is people with goodwill, but different perspectives working together. And I have this image where I think I have shared before of it like a team, like in football or soccer, where you want attackers to score goals and defenders to stop you losing. And when I look at, say, the characteristics of the left and the right, let's take them in broad ways, you can see progressives and conservatives. Well, that's attackers and defenders. Well, a team needs both of those. It needs people going, we can make this better. And then there are other people going, yeah, but don't make it worse by mistake. Don't go rushing forward at such pace that you fuck up back here. We have to work together here. So you're looking at a unividual approach to decision making, which isn't we're on this side shouting at you for being evil or stupid while you shout at us the same, but instead you're seeking out those with goodwill, but different perspectives, perhaps opposite perspectives. So that's what I've been doing for the last period of my life. And I haven't been talking about it very much, apart from to close friends, because it's been a work in progress, as it still is. And what's been shocking for me is that whilst I felt like I started this probably 20 years ago, whilst I felt like I had come quite a journey, it's been in my late 50s and early 60s, which is very, very late. And this is just my confession to you, that I think I've actually seen how embedded these divisive ideas have been in me without even really acknowledging it. And now I see it everywhere and in most of my friends. Now, it's very interesting because I think some of my friends think I've moved from being a progressive to being a conservative, which I haven't. Actually, what I'm interested in is being a unividual, and that's mean understanding the other, this voice. So to just give you an example, just because sometimes rooting it in a personal experience can really help. Some years ago, when my son was doing his master's at Oxford, he said, come up, we have some great speakers at the Oxford Union. And I said, okay, who's on next? And he said, Roger Scruton. Now, people may not know who Roger Scruton is. He's died now. Roger Scruton was a very famous right-wing philosopher, very influential on Margaret Thatcher. And I'm just going to tell you, I'm ashamed, but I'll just tell you. He said, come up and see Roger Scruton. And I said, well, that Tory cunt. Go on then, we'll do it. This is not that many years ago. I wish I was telling you this. Well, I was 20. I said that, no, this is this is later, 50s. But part of my program, I went to see Roger Scruton, who'd been the philosophical adversary. And I met a charming, thoughtful, compassionate, kind man who said at one point, the thing about conservatism is it's all about love. It's about love of the way things already are. And I loved him. And it's like, wow, how did I ever get myself? I think I'm thoughtful. I think I try to be compassionate. How did I get myself to a place where I thought that if someone was on the other side, they were serving back, he was serving I guess going back to he was serving the ruling class. He's actually a miner's son, but he dresses like an aristocrat and speaks very well, but he's a miner's son. And that led me to others, people who were saying the opposite to me. Thomas Sowell in America, the African-American writer, I think has been a big player for me, who helped me understand what the right was saying about race, what the right was saying about the economies and economists. And that led me to Margaret Thatcher's economist, Milton Friedman. I think there was one moment, guys, where I was just going down this rabbit hole with all these thinkers were her like taboo thinkers. And my heart just sunk because I thought, oh my God, I know where this is leading. This is all leading to Milton Friedman. And I'm going to like him. Oh God. And it did lead to Milton Friedman, and I did like him because he was a thoughtful, compassionate man who just had reached different conclusions to me. So one of the things that is marking our evolution, I want to suggest, is the development of our ability to process. And one of the things which have made us who we are is the ability to reflect, that we can imagine possibilities and go this one or this one, just in a very crude way, but we can do it in immense ways. But all of that reflection comes from the foundation of our beliefs, our ideational network. And when you're born in a culture or you get into a culture, they all come from that, which is why people find it difficult to move from it. But the next level of evolution, which was what dear Socrates started off, I think, or he became a spokesperson for, which blew up in the Renaissance, really came of age in the Enlightenment, and which is blossoming now, is something else. And it's still quite rare, really. And it's what I would call foundational reflection, where you're not just reflecting, you're not going this or that based on my ideational network. You're going, I wonder if my ideational network is right. I wonder if the foundational ideas I'm making this decision from should be thought about. And that's philosophy. That's what we do every Sunday. And it's hard. It's hard because you have an ideational network to keep you safe. You have an understanding of the world to keep you safe. And if that goes, whoa, it's like, whoa, you're not safe. But it's essential. It's why I've always emphasized coming into the mystery, because that gives you room to look at it. If you realize, God, who knows what this is? Now you've got some space. So what I see is that the process that I've been through pretty intensely over the last 5-6 years has been looking at my political foundational ideation and going and being shocked. That's the honest truth. Absolutely shocked how deep the assumptions went and how I was just, everything was getting categorized in that way. And what's happened from that is it's just opened me up to, there's a whole load of people who are coming from a different direction to me. They've had a different path, different culture, different experience, but reach the same compassion, the same universal benevolence. And they're worth listening to, because if you can get together enough people with that goodwill, but with different insights, you've got a team. Then you've got people who can play together. And I feel that what we're experiencing in the moment in the West is kind of a precursor to that. And I think last time I called it it's like the age of political absurdity. I heard Douglas Murray, who another one, a conservative thinker who I've come to like, and I would have just dismissed out of hand not that long ago. Because again, he's thoughtful, he has something to say, he's open, he's rational, he's engaged. It's like, great, that's what we need. But he was saying, who would have thought 5 years ago we would live it, the way he put it was so nice. He said, who would have thought 5 years ago in American culture that the Republicans would have a president who was that guy off The Apprentice, and the Democrats would be worried about what pronouns we should use. No one could possibly guess that. And yet it happened. And what I see behind that is a kind of, and what I see with a lot of the subcultures that are going on at the moment is a kind of absurdity of these divisions. And I see us getting pulled into these groups again. Well, but they're different groups now, and yelling at each other from these different groups. And it feels like a precursor, if we can get it, to just dropping all of that and finding, look, us is everyone. Everyone just finds themselves somewhere in this class with this color, this amount of melatonin or lack of melatonin, or a penis or not. And from there, each one of us has to, what they're going to do. And the opportunity is to experience that universal benevolence, and then the individual responsibility to apply it. And there you see the paralogical insight right there, which is at the heart of the Unividual. The paralogical insight behind Unividual is that you're the universe and you're you. And they sit together perfectly. And so you have universal benevolence, but you can't care for everybody. That's impossible. So you bring it here. You bring your kindness, your intellect, your action, your service. You make your life, your story of service to the great story, but you do it here. So here's my last thought, which is that within this that paralogical insight is, and I have to just say wave to John here, because John sent me an article that he'd written on ideas around, I think, that both and I want to say, that's where you can see, look, we have gone through the 20th century, The big battle was between a kind of dark individualism, where it's like me, 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 and a dark collectivism, which was like suppress the, which is literally the Soviet Union, China, and America and Britain, and this kind of, and yet actually, what Unividual points to is how those fit together, and it goes, you don't achieve something which is good for the group by suppressing the individual, but neither do you do something which is good for the individual by ignoring the collective. Actually, you need to create every possibility for the individual to realize their individual potentiality in service of us. And that's the jump. You as an individual, you realize your individual potentiality in service of us, so that false dichotomy between individualism and collectivism just ends, and you're able to see the nuance in the paralogical nuance. So, like any idea we've got to go forward, there will be things about it which are good, and there'll be things about it which are potentially not bad. We might even not notice those. But if you have a basic paralogical understanding, you can see, well, there's both. So when the opponents go, there's this bad thing, they can also acknowledge the good thing, and vice versa. When you're looking the good thing, you go, yeah, but that's a danger, you're right. And to see that so much in, I mean, just an obvious example, but just to think about justice. Justice is a great thing. Yeah, fantastic. It is wonderful, isn't it? But the fact is, in this country at the moment, there's a big thing about the conviction around rape is low. But the fact is, if you want more rapists to be convicted for their crimes, you will end up convicting more innocent men. And if you want no innocent men to get convicted for something they didn't do, you will get less conviction of rapists. That's just the way it is. And having that subtlety of that ability to understand, you're constantly playing with these opposites and looking for how to bring them together. It becomes a cooperative enterprise. It becomes a cooperative enterprise in which we're going. So last thought, I said that'd be the last thought. Here's the last thought, and I want to hear what you've got to say, whether I've made any sense at all. So the last thing is, it's like, well, what the hell? What does that mean? And my feeling is, look, when I look at politics now, I feel like it's like almost like I've gone back to, I've time traveled back to the Middle Ages in England at the War of the Roses, and someone's going to me, so do you support the Lancaster House of Lancaster or the House of York? Which side are you on? And I'm like, I'm not on either side. I'm from the future. We don't give a fuck about this. I feel like that. It's like, whoa, no, I'm from the future. And it feels like the role is to be future people now, to actually find somehow ways to bring this different understanding in, whereby you can see this voice is saying something and its opposite voice is saying something. But the thing that unites them, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's loads of people who haven't got this universal benevolence, and they're dangerous. But there are more and more people who do. And if we name it and we spot it and we bring those people together, and we are those people, then it becomes possible, I think, that not only individually, but collectively, over this next whole period of human history, we could create a much, much, much better world, much quicker and easier than we anticipate, if we made those shifts. Okay. Did that make any sense, guys? Tell me how I did. And forgive me if I said anything too stupid.